a door meeting all the other codes that are in the building code. But most importantly, it has to work as a shelter door. And it's all about life safety. Hurricane code, the door is protecting the envelope of the building. Basically, the door is saving lives. The door is there to protect the lives inside the shelter. So everything that you do, everything you think about, you got to think about what we're doing here. And basically, we're protecting lives. So it's the ultimate life safety standard. We're going to learn about the basic requirements of the ICC 500 and talk about FEMA 320 and 361, the new standards that are just out, show the importance of doors and hardware and protection against tornadoes and hurricanes. We're going to have the ability to distinguish between tested and certified products and non-certified products. And hopefully we'll have a working knowledge of certifications and approved use for shelters for doors. The standards that are out there for tornado shelters are FEMA 320, which came out in December of 2014, just a few months ago. And this standard is for shelters that are protecting people with 16 or under persons in the shelter. You know, it's usually classified as residential shelters, but it could be small commercial. FEMA 361 was released just in March, a couple months ago in 2015, and that's for public shelters, larger commercial type shelters. ICC 500 is the standard that has been adopted by the code, so the ICC 500 has been in the code since the 2008 version, or actually 2009 International Building Code, and before what it said was if you're going to build a shelter, you have to build it to the ICC 500. Now the 2015 code will be doing something more than that. The new ICC 500 is a standard, like I said, and it's referenced in the code for the construction of shelters. I've already told you about the 2009 version. It really contains all the technical information on shelter construction. It's adopted by reference into the code, and the code adds specific requirements about where it's needed to be used. It's, like I said, it was been in there since the 2009 version. Things that are in the new code that really affects door openings. We could talk, there's a lot of changes in the code, but we're specifically going to talk about what changes are in the code that affects door openings. Basically establishes minimum requirements. So, you know, when you're testing your doors, you're testing it to the minimum requirements. You know, you can't go lower than what, for the testing, than what's there. And the numbers on the left are the sections in the code where this is found. Section 106.2.1, inspections of fabricators is required for prefabricated or panelized storm shelter components unless they have been inspected and labeled by approved agency. So this is saying that if you're a modular manufacturer of shelters, it's up to the architect or engineer to come inspect it as it's being made, or if you're under a labeling agreement with a third-party certifier, then you don't have to do that. 107.2.5, 107.2.6, manufacturer's installation instructions for doors and hardware are now required to be submitted as part of the construction documents, including anchor locations and capacity. That's been something that has been missing, and the majority of issues that we run into are installation problems, where this hardware for these doors are usually not your normal everyday hardware. You know, a lot of them are not easy to install, so they want to make sure that the instructions are there. Labels is something new. Labels are required to identify the name of the manufacturer, the function and performance characteristic of the product, and the name of the approved agency that indicates that the representative sample of the product has been tested and evaluated by an approved agency. So what that is saying is that doors and frames are now required to have labels depicting, certified labels that are depicting the performance of the doors. In 301.1.2, anchors other than what was tested, and usually generally we test in test bucks, either a wood test buck or it could be a steel buck. So we don't test with every type of anchor. So every type of anchors that you are needs to be designed for pull out and shear, and where it's placed, how many anchors you need per opening with accepted engineering practices provided as part of the construction document. So what that's talking about is having engineered calculations for your anchors, for all the different type of anchors other than what you tested with. 306.3.1, assembly door opening testing. The code talks about doors as building components. It's the door opening that's a building component. Nowhere does it say anything about components within the door opening. So testing, you have to test all the hardware with the door that it's being used on. There is no evaluations, and simply because the testing is so severe that a lot of manufacturers use custom doors with custom reinforcements in the door, reinforcements around the strike, making sure that the strike doesn't pull out, special strikes. So just by taking one lock that was tested on one door and put on another door, you're not using the same type of reinforcements. And if you've seen a lot of testing, you've seen a lot of, we'll take deadbolt strikes for instance, they just tear, the bolts just tear right through the strike and the frame itself during testing. So so it's an assembly test. Doors, windows, and impact protective systems are to be tested to the maximum minimum sizes for use. Basically what that's saying is that you test to it before you test to a 8080 opening, and all sizes smaller are included. The new code changes that. It's looking at testing the largest size and the smallest size because the forces and the energies are different between the largest. And as you get smaller, you have less area for the forces to dissipate. The impact locations are closer together on smaller doors. So basically, what it looks like it's going to come down to is you're going to be testing the largest and smallest size pair and the largest and smallest size single door. That's a big change for manufacturers. Impact and testing includes dislodgement and disengagement, where they put a piece of craft paper behind the door and anything falls off the door during the impact testing fails the test. So if you have a screw that pops off, a closer arm, or any type of a panic cover that tears that paper, and you lose the test and you've got to start all over again, because they don't want anything flying inside the shelter that could harm the people taking shelter there. The 2015 International Building makes some very specific changes. In storm shelters, now in 2015, all Group E occupancies, educational facilities that are over an occupant load of 50 are now to be constructed in accordance with the ICC 500. The shelter shall be capable of housing the total occupant load. I've seen in my travels, I've seen a lot of shelters going up on schools that will hold 300 people, but there's 800 in the school. That doesn't meet the code. A lot of more than not, with doors, they'll build this big concrete shelter for people, and then they'll just put regular doors in. It just doesn't. I just can't fathom why they would do that, because it's the weakest link already, even if you use tested and certified doors. But they'll cheapen up and call it a shelter, even though it's got just standard doors on it. That will be changed. Also, critical emergency operation buildings. You've got 911 call centers, emergency operations centers, fire, rescue, ambulance, and police stations all have to have tornado shelters constructed with ICC 500. That's a requirement in the code. Why are we doing this? 2007 Enterprise, Alabama had a tornado where the school was under a tornado warning. The school called the parents to come pick up their kids, but before the parents were able to get there, the tornado hit the school and picked up the roof, and the walls came in, and I believe it killed 7 students in their safe area in the school. And after that, the state of Alabama passed a state law, it's House Bill 459, requiring tornado shelters in all new schools and public schools in Alabama. That's been going on now for about almost 5 years now, and they've done a great job. All new public schools are being built with tornado shelters. And it's funny that now the private schools are putting shelters in because they're competing for students with the public schools, and people feel that they're safer in the public schools. So the private schools are putting shelters in. In Illinois, House Bill 2513 went into law January 1st of this year, requiring tornado shelters in all K through 12 schools. Also being built to the ice.
I hate to interrupt, but before you get too far into this topic, can I ask just one question that's been posed?
Certainly.
And you might have covered it, but I'm not quite sure. It says, the question is stated, are tornado shelter doors required to be inspected on an annual basis? And if so, is there an inspection criteria or qualification for the inspector?
Great question. No, that's not part of the code. It's not required. Should it be? Absolutely, because these doors are very heavy. Depending on the type of hinges they're mounted on, these doors have a tendency to start sagging after a while. So it's something that needs to be done, and it's something that I know, that Dr. Kiesling and FEMA and other people have been talking about. They just haven't set that up yet. But great question, and yes, it should be done, but there's nothing in the code that requires it.
Maybe I could get you on one more before you continue on, and then I'll let you go from there. How about that?
That's fine.
And if I just, the question is 7S.F per, I would assume square feet maybe, per occupant still the area?
No, it's 10 square. It's 5 square feet per student, 10 square feet for a wheelchair. But then they have deductions in there for if you're using a cafeteria, you have to deduct for the furniture that's in the room. So it's not a full. You don't get the full capacity of the room. If it's a classroom, you have to deduct for the desk. And as far as I know, with FEMA, they have, I think if it's a large open facility, there's a 10% reduction or 15% reduction just to leave aisleways for the students to be able to get in and fill the shelter. So there are deductions. It's not a full, but it's 5 square feet per occupant, 10 for wheelchair. Another good question.
Thank you,
but that's in my presentation for ICC 500 shelters, and we're trying to keep this to the door openings, but a good question. So the stronger codes are enacted because we're having more and more tornado outbreaks that are creating a lot of damage. The tornado outbreak that we had in 2011 that included, Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and Missouri. There were a lot of deaths associated with that. I think a combined 759 people, I believe. Lots and lots of injuries, into the billions of dollars of damage. So there's a lot more scrutiny on codes and how we build structures. They're coming up with new building codes around the country to help alleviate some of the damage issues, and shelters anyway to alleviate life safety issues. The 2015 International Building Code, that dark gray area is the 250 mile-an-hour wind zone, which the codes are geared towards. And something I didn't say, that all that information about educational facilities, and it's just for the 250 mile-an-hour wind zone, which touches all or parts of 22 states around the country. And you can see it goes up, up past Minneapolis, St. Paul, and all the way down to the, the middle of Texas. A large area of the country. Now that lighter gray area is a 200 mile-an-hour wind zone. Along the coast, it's mostly hurricane standards, but there are standards for impact and pressure for that 200 mile-an-hour zone, but it's not required as it is in the 250 mile-an-hour zone. Definitions, components, we talked about that. It referenced envelope products such as door openings, windows, wall louvers, skylights. Those are the most susceptible to damage in a tornado, and we're not talking about components within the door assembly. Design pressure. Design pressure is a calculation that takes a lot of factors. It's developed out of ASCE 7. It's an engineering calculation. And so when they come up with the design pressure, there's a safety factor of 20% added in the 2008 version of the FEMA 361 and ICC 500, where it says that you have to test to 20% over the required design pressure. So before, we used to test to a 252 PSF design pressure as a kind of a default for tornado codes, tornado shelters. Now we have to test to about 303 to have a 20% safety factor over that. So now if you test to 252, you only have a design pressure of about 205, 207, something like that as your design pressure. So that's been added since the 2008 code. Windborne debris level is in the 250 mile-an-hour zone is a 15-pound 2x4 shot at 100 miles an hour. And I've got some examples of that coming up. Approved is really acceptable to the building official or authority having jurisdiction. They make the approval. We can have approved products. We could have UL, ITS, AMA labels on our products, but it still needs to be approved by the authority having jurisdiction. Assembly testing. We're talking about frames, doors, hardware. They all work together in these tests, and a failure by any part is a failure, and the entire assembly must be tested together as a unit. We're talking about largest and smallest size now, so that really affects manufacturers. There's a question about being tested in the orientation of use. Before we tested as an in-swing, we got outswing. That's coming into question now. I don't know how that's going to go yet. I hope, because in-swing is the most severe test. It's away from the stops. I can't think of any reason why an outswing would be more severe, but that's what I've been hearing. We already talked about test pressure. Anchors are calculated for shear and pull-out strength, as we talked before. This is a slide I like to use in all my presentation. It shows the bright colored lines in this are last 50 years of large EF4, EF5 tornadoes. The darker blue, it's kind of like the background, is all the smaller tornadoes. But this shows, it says 61 years of tornado tracks. So you can see the concentration of where the tornadoes are. Natural boundaries are the Rockies and the Appalachian Mountains. I love the Fujita damage scale because it talks about, light damage, moderate damage. When it comes up to EF4, it's devastating damage, and then EF5 is incredible damage. I mean, that's a scientific term for an EF5 tornado. It's just incredible. Anybody that's interested, you can go on YouTube and type in, tornado damage, and you'll get an idea. There's a lot of videos that are out there that shows what these large tornadoes do. This is St. John's Hospital in Joplin, Missouri. It was hit by an EF5 tornado. This hospital had to be destroyed because it damaged the structural parts of this building so severely they had to just go ahead and tear it down and build a new building. These are some of the pictures from the inside of St. John's Hospital. There were 14 people killed inside the hospital, mostly by flying debris. You can see that door. That door must have flew over there from the other side of the corridor because the door is still there for that room. So severe damage on the inside of St. John's. This is one of the walls on St. John's Hospitals to show you the flying debris and how severe the impacts from that debris. You look at the chair, it's not a slab laying on the ground. That chair is embedded into that concrete wall. But you look at the other debris above that. You see 2x4s and looks like 2x6s and almost a tree branch. It's flying at such speeds that it embeds itself into solid concrete. That's an 8-inch solid concrete poured wall. And we're all shelters or just talk about for saving lives. The hurricane I said was an envelope of the building. It's protecting the envelope because if you lose the envelope, the pressure gets inside the building and it causes severe damage. In the tornadoes, they're just talking about protecting the people who are taking shelter behind the doors. I showed this a couple weeks ago. This is a test at IBHS, which is an insurance test lab in South Carolina. They brought the pressure up. They broke out the windows with a cannon, and it shows what the test pressure does to the inside of a structure. That was not a shelter. That was just regular construction. Shelters are built to withstand internal pressurization. So if that window were to fail in a tornado shelter, the structure would hold together because it's built to maintain that. The problem is the people inside aren't built to withstand the flying debris and the that's associated with a window breaking out. So we strive, what FEMA calls near absolute protection is what we're going for. So testing, there was a EF4 tornado in Mayflower, Arkansas in April 2014, April last year, that he was a retired builder and he built a safe room according to FEMA 320, built the walls, the roof cap. He went to a distributor and asked for a storm door and they sold him this door. Now, I was part of the group that went and analyzed the door to see what it was, and it was just a stock hollow metal 18 gauge door. Could have been any manufacturer. They put 3 grade 3 deadbolts on it in a residential lock, and the fellow that was in the shelter said that it felt like during the storm the door was going to come apart, so he and his wife went up against the door to help hold it, and it was impacted. And you can see it was impacted. We think maybe it was a piece of plywood or countertop or something. We don't know for sure, but it hit right at the locks, and the builder of the shelter's wife was killed in this because she was thrown against the back, and he was severely injured and spent a lot of time in the hospital for a broken shoulder and a lot of internal injuries. But the lesson is to be learned is you can't use standard doors. Just so it's cheaper to use an 18 gauge door with 3 residential deadbolts. It's not safe. The pictures below is a test that we did on an 18 gauge door, and the test was done before April of 2014, and the failure was almost identical. You know, the door folded enough that just the deadbolt and the latch just pulled out of the strike. The top deadbolt ripped out from the inside of the lock. The top one was the residential lock that was used. The middle one's a grade 2 lock. So deadbolts, you got to test the deadbolt, because grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, that's a performance standard. That's how many times it opens and closes. It does 1 million or 2 million or 5 million. Really, it doesn't fail at the bolt. It fails, it rips off at its weakest point, which is where the bolt usually attaches to the king, and it's just brass in there, and it just rips right out. This is a test plan that Texas Tech is working on, or 3 of the pictures are. They're testing different types of doors to see how they react in tornado situations, and even they have been kind of in awe at some of the performances of just regular doors. This first one I'm going to hit is a 26 gauge residential door, which a lot of home builders are building shelters for home and then sending the homeowner to Home Depot to buy a door for $200. The second one is just a slow motion of that first test. And that goes on for a while. So I'll move along to the one that says test 2. That's an 18 gauge door. It's really, we used a hurricane approved door, 3 grade 2 deadbolts. And this is the first test. Remember that in order to pass a test, a tornado test, you have to hit the door in 3 different locations. So these are just one hit on these doors. And then we have a slower motion. It's not as good as Texas Tech did. But those pictures we saw on the previous page was pictures of that door after that test. Now this is the bottom right one is back at Texas Tech, and it was a 16 gauge door in a 16 gauge frame. Now they do have the second hit that hit this door, and really this door failed after the first hit because you're only allowed 3 inches of deflection in the door, and that's much more than 3 inches. but the second door the second hit was down by the locks, and it opened the door completely. So that gives you an idea of the test, of how severe the testing is for tornado shelters. This is a picture of craft paper behind the door. This is craft paper behind the hardware. If you were testing a closer and other items, you'd have it the full width of the door. And to the right, that's considered a failure. You know, we had a screw come through and another small piece, it tore the paper. You failed the test, you got to start all over again. Very important test. It's taken very serious in the test labs. Openings in shelters must be tested and approved according to the new 2015 requirements in the ICC 500. It's assembly attested. The new codes are requiring independent third-party certification and labeling. And you have to have installation instructions to make sure the door is properly aligned and functional. One of the things that we teach is the frame is really the most important thing, because it's got to be square and plumb. Everything else that goes on after the frame is installed is, if it's the door or the frame is out of square and plumb, then the door is not going to fit right. The hinges aren't going to be, you're going to have to start shimming things. It's not the way it was tested. It just really make sure when you're selling jobs that the contractor understands that it's critical that the frame is installed properly. Shutters are another thing that they also have to be tested to the largest and smallest size, and that's basically what brought this all up, of testing the largest and smallest size, because when you get down to smaller sizes like this, the impacts locations are very close together, and the door hardware that worked on an 8080 door would not work on this door, because the impacts are just too much more forces working on the locks. So just using third-party certifications, it gives you an independent status. They have follow-up services with the manufacturers, so they go out and make sure the manufacturer's building it the same way that they tested it. Tests must be witnessed or done in a UL or Warnock-Hersey approved. Could be AMA. Anybody that's an approved certification agency can label products. And there's rigorous monitoring of the use of the labels to make sure that people aren't using the label on products that they shouldn't be. This is a good time to talk about FEMA also. FEMA doesn't approve anything. If you ever see something that says FEMA approved or FEMA certified, FEMA does not certify products. They don't approve products. They certainly don't endorse products. They're very serious about that. So if you might want to question if you see that, because FEMA will go, if they find out, they'll go after them and tell them to stop using that terminology. The terminology is you meet the FEMA standards. It's not that FEMA's approving it. This is a label. Actually, this is a label that they use in FEMA 320 and 361 that shows what you need to have on a label. You know, in ICC 500 it's very specific, but you can see here it's calling out the standards. The new labels will call out the new ICC 500 2014, not 2008. This one calls out for test pressure and design pressure, so that people aren't confused. If they see one pressure, is that the test pressure or the design pressure? That wasn't needed before the 2008 code, but after 2008 you needed to have both, or be clear at the one that you're using. Your impact test that you use, because ICC 500 also regulates hurricanes, and hurricane codes can be a 9-pound 2x4 at 80 miles an hour or 15-pound 2x4. It's a lesser standard for a 200-mile-an-hour zone or 160-mile-an-hour zone. So you need to be specific as to what 2x4 impact that you used on your testing. So any more questions right now? If not, are we still on?
Yeah, Jim?
Okay, thanks.
Yes, we do have, I do show that we have 2 questions.
Okay.
One question is, what about letter of certification for door units for EF3 resistance in lieu of actual unit testing? Example, door and frames that are built heavier and include other special features than tested units. Bullet resistant, forced entry, EF3 resistant, UL rated single product.
I think the EF3 resistance is something that's made up. I haven't seen it in any standard. The testing requirements are clear as what you test for the 250-mile-an-hour wind zone. So no, if you don't test to the ICC 500 requirements, you're not certified. We don't certify products for smaller tornadoes, or we don't certify products for bullet resistance, and those are very important where they're needed, and I've had calls for bullet resistant, tornado resistant door, and they have to meet bullet resistance and tornado resistance. There's, like in hurricane codes, I was told early on by Jamie Gascon and Miami-Dade that no code takes precedence over others. You have to meet all of them. So our tornado doors, we have to fire test. We have to make sure they meet egress. The hardware has to open. The exit devices have to open with 15 pounds of force to get out. I don't know. If the new codes come through and they want 5 pounds of opening force, I don't know what we're going to do. But you have to meet all the codes. So no, any of those, if they don't meet the ICC 500, you can't use them in the 250-mile-an-hour zone. Next question.
Thank you. Next question, what allowances are there for oversized doors, 10 by 9, 10 by 10, 9 by 10 garage doors, and can they be certified construction?
No. I spoke at the last DASMA meeting, maybe not been the last DASMA meeting, but it was last year in September, October in Chicago. And at that time, no one had an overhead door that met the impacts. They're having a very difficult time passing the impacts, and there is no provisions. You know, that you look at that large opening, you need to make sure that the people inside that structure are going to be protected from a 15-pound 2x4 at 100 miles an hour. And right now, there's no, that I know of, no overhead door of 10 by 10 that meets the code. I believe that we'll have one fairly soon. I know that there's a few manufacturers that are working on it, but as of right now, we have no products that I know of that have. There is one, I'm sorry, there is a folding, kind of a bifold type door for fire stations that they have been able to meet the code. It's a panels with bolts that go into the ground in the head. It's not a true overhead door or rolling door, but there is one door, so that leads me to believe that others will follow.
Jim, what about NORAD?
What about NORAD? NORAD is not in the business to do certifications or products. The building code calls for ICC 500, so
okay.
I don't know what NORAD would have to do with door openings.
Okay, someone asked that, and you did mention 2x4s, and the question that is posed is, why do they choose 2x4s and lumber to test doors?
That's a great question. I've always asked that. I found out later that when the team there are teams that go out after a tornado to review the damage. It's called mitigation assessment teams, and they go out a lot of times. I know Larry Tanner does that quite a bit, and the most typical type of windborne debris has been 2x4s. You know, every house that gets destroyed throws hundreds of 2x4s into the tornado, and they've seen tornadoes going through walls. In fact, at Texas Tech, if you go there, they've got a hollow concrete block wall there where they tested a 2x4 and went right through the wall. So that's why they selected 2x4s, because you know, they can't really fire HVAC units, and that's one of the reasons why in my presentations I tell architects to, even though doors have been tested and approved, you still want to think about protecting the doors, because there are things larger in a tornado than 2x4s. So don't put the door flush against the outside wall. You know, move it in a little bit, so if there's a school bus that's flying in the air, which we've seen that, you know, it'll hit the wall before it hits the door, you know, to give the door a little bit of protection. So that's why we do 2x4 test. It will pierce a door or a window before you know, a larger object would. So it's a severe test, a very severe test, if anybody has gone through the testing, but that's why they pick 2x4s. So finishing up, and then we can take more questions if we have time. So the requirements for tornado shelters have changed. They changed in 2008. They changed today. I think one of the misconceptions out there is you just need a steel door with 3 deadbolts. That's long gone. That was before even 2008. Now you have to test, and even 320 is the same test as the 361 door now. So it's 3 impacts, 3 missile impacts. You got to test for pressure. You got to have the paper, the craft paper for items falling off a door. Door openings are tested as assemblies and can be used as assemblies. You can't mix and match hardware. Door openings are the weakest part of the shelter because it's, you know, it has to operate. It's got to open and close like a normal door, but it has to be a shelter door. So that's very tough to do, and I know most manufacturers will tell you it's very difficult to meet all the requirements, but that's what we're told to do. Installation instructions and anchor calculations, we have found now that we've been in this for a while, installation is probably the most important. In the test lab, you're testing to pristine conditions, maximum embedment of the anchors, maximum embedment of the, you know, the locks into the strike, and, you know, we've seen all kinds of things that are done out in the field, and it's very important that it's installed properly. So remember, you know, we're striving for near absolute life safety. There's a bill in Congress right now that a senator from, I think it's Oklahoma, got funding to get, you know, try to find more lead time of when a tornado is going to strike. And his goal is to have 0 deaths from tornadoes. Well, it's a great and admirable goal, but to do that, if you get 5 more minutes of time before a tornado hits, you got to have some place for the people to go to be safe from tornadoes if you're going to have 0 deaths. And that's, you know, in-home shelters, that's public shelters. We've got to have more discussions about how we're going to protect people in the future. So I'm good for more questions. Most of you can get my, I'm glad to take, you know, personal emails to talk about this, or Um, but if you have any questions now, I'd be glad to take them.
I do have a few questions.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any tornado-rated electric locking devices?
Yes, there are. There's a few manufacturers, and generally what it's doing is it's electrifying the trim on the device so you can lock or unlock the device from remotely. There are a few that have other type of electronic, and I think that's what's coming in the future. That there's a lot of issues about electric and locking and unlocking, and yes, that is available now.
And this is more of a statement, but I guess they want you to comment. An architect once said to me, the cleanest door is air, meaning there was an entryway that was a direct line of view, but had 2 turns of 90 degrees.
Yes, you can do that. It's very clear. If you look in ICC 500, they give you, you see them a lot of time in bathrooms where the walls have to meet the standards, but you have to have 2 turns. It really has to be that a 2x4 has to hit 2 walls before it hits the door in order to use that type of construction. And you can even do it so you don't even need a door in that opening. I'm kind of looking up to get that terminology now. Alcove or baffled entry systems is what it's called, and there's several examples of that in the ICC 500 that you can see. Whether or not that's a lot of people don't like to use that because of the egress. They want people to have direct access to the exterior when they're getting out, but there's nothing wrong with using that. It's in the code. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a few more, Jim.
Okay.
Let's see. Can tornado door frames be installed using existing opening wall anchors? Is the door frame required to be grouted in place?
Good question. It's really an individual manufacturer's requirements that you have to follow, but yes, generally speaking, if you're using T or masonry type anchors going up in a block wall, they usually want that grouted. If you're using existing wall anchors, each one of those wall anchor manufacturers publish their pull-out strength and their shear strength. And no, if you're using those, you don't have to grout the openings. You have to do that calculation and engineering calculation, and when you do engineering calculations, they have a safety factor of 4. So a lot of times, if you test with an anchor and then you do engineering calculations, they're probably going to make you add anchors to what you tested with because there's much more of a safety factor in calculations. But generally speaking, you can use existing masonry anchors. There's a lot of them. You just have to make sure you either do the engineering calculations or you test with it. And it's up to the manufacturer's installation instructions on what you're allowed to do. Some manufacturers may require you to grout it, some may not. It just depends on what their calculations come up with.
Okay, how about a couple more? If I'm specifying hardware for a tornado shelter assembly, how do I know specifically what to specify in the hardware group?
You ask for the test reports, or if you're using a third-party certifier, on their websites they have the hardware for their tested assemblies, listed with the doors. It's usually, you have to look at the door, and whatever door you're using, you've got to use what they tested with. So, and you'll find that listed. Either ask for their test report. If they're certified, there'll be somewhere you can go that they'll list the hardware that they tested with and that you can use. It's not, it's not free and easy, but you have to use what that door tested with.
Okay, and if I test a door with a surface-mounted 3-point lock, do I also have to test a concealed version of the 3-point if I intend to sell both?
Yes, if you're going to sell both, yes, you have to test both, because obviously they are different locks and would take different, a surface-mounted lock, the reinforcements would be different than when you're concealing and you have concealed rods. You have different latches. So yes, you have to test both. Different strikes.
There might be one or two more, and I don't believe we've asked this before. Are there any Tornado-rated electric locking devices? Did we ask that before?
Yeah, we did, and yes, there are, and I really feel that there's going to be more, but right now there are a few.
And I think we have one more. Is there 3-point latching required? Oh, it just kicked me out.
I think I know what they were getting to. In the old codes, it required that you have 3 points of latching. Now it's required that you pass the test. It was I can remember back in 2007, I guess, that I asked Dr. Kiesling one time why they say that you have to use 3 points of latching in a heavy steel door in the early codes, and he said, well, when we were developing this standard, there were no test requirements for, and he and FEMA kind of decided that would give the occupants of the shelter the best chance of survival if they had 3 points of latching. So redundancy. New testing, no, you just have to pass the test. Now, and I'll say this, testing is so severe that most times you pretty much need the 3 points of latching or more. But there have been products there are products on the market, like vertical rod exits, that were made special for the tornado doors that only have top and bottom latching, and they passed the test. So the requirement for 3 points of latching is no longer there.
Okay, and how about one more? Is the general ICC 500 presentation available as a recording?
No, it's not. I've never had the opportunity to do that, but it's probably something that we may do in the future. I believe, and I'll check with Dr. Kiesling, I think that that would be the best place that we would have that, and I'll work with him to try to get something on the NSSA website. If you get a chance, go to the NSSA website and check it out. There's a lot more information there. Anything else?
And maybe, I'm not sure if this was asked yet, is there any plans to make sure that installers are certified to do install in the future?
That's a great question because it's so sorely needed in the marketplace. Not by any organization that I know of. I know that Texas Tech has done that with their residential shelters, that they have a certified installer program for residential shelters. I think that works well. We don't have anything for commercial shelters. Individual manufacturers may do that and require it. I know I've been asked a lot by architects and building officials that we would do that because they have people installing this type of hardware that really shouldn't be installing, because they leave parts off and they change parts, and so it's very important. But no, there isn't anything on the commercial side that has that type of thing. I'd recommend it highly to organizations to try to come up with, trained installers in their markets.
Okay, well, I think that we are out of time, and I would just like to say thank you so much to Jim for this wonderful, very, very informative presentation this morning, and I hope everybody got so much out of it as we did here. And have a wonderful rest of your day, and again, thank you so much, Jim.
Oh, you're very welcome. I completely enjoyed it.